All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the League Express podcast. My name's Jake Kearnan, and joining me as always is the editor of League Express, Martyn Sadler, and it's just you and I today, Martyn. We've had a lot of guests over the last few weeks, but just you and I today, mate.
Yeah, well, there's an awful lot to talk about, isn't there? And loads of news, loads of things happening in big matches on both sides of the world. Lots of interesting personalities involved in major news stories. Darren Lockyer being the obvious example, taking an interest in buying London Broncos, and Tony Sutton, the chief executive of the RFL, he's announced his impending departure from that post. So it's there's a lot of interest in things on both sides of the world. We've got the playoffs beginning in Australia this weekend, so we could be here all day talking, couldn't we, if we're
Mate,
not careful?
yeah, it's all happening, mate. That's for sure.
Yeah,
But yes, mate. Well, how about
we'll
we?
try and keep it reasonably brief.
We'll try, mate. All right, mate. First
But
cab off
no
the
doubt
rank.
fail.
Yeah, that's right. First cab off the rank, mate. We've got the obviously you've just touched on it there, but the RFL chief exec Tony Sutton. He's announced that he's going to stand down. Looks like he's going to stay on board with the RFL for the remainder of 2025, but standing down from that chief exec position. Have you seen? Has there been any whispers about this, Martin? Is this something you saw coming?
Oh, I think so. I think Tony. Tony is. I think his downfall has been Salford, to be perfectly honest. If we describe it as a downfall, I mean, Tony's been a chief executive who's preferred not to have a high profile, in the media. And I think the way that the game has gone in the last few years, that's probably not what the game's needed, if we're honest about it. And um, I think he made some quite difficult decisions in relation to Salford, right going back to last November, when Salford were signing players, for example, when they clearly couldn't afford to pay for them, given their financial state at that time. And yet Tony waved those signings through when he would have had the power to put a brake on them, if we're honest about it. And he failed to do that. And then, of course, he signed off the acquisition of Salford by the new owners, the current owners, who have been such a letdown for the club, and who the 1873 group in Salford, that grouping of Salford supporters, are trying to manoeuvre out of the club, and I don't know how much success they can have in doing that. But so it's been a difficult time for Tony. Obviously, he's been there when the clubs expressed their acute dissatisfaction with the previous board of directors, of which he was one. So I'm afraid that when people decide that you no longer that the board of directors is no longer up to the job, that the guy who's the chief executive and who's a member of that board, by implication, it's likely that he will go sooner rather than later. So I think it was inevitable, really, that he was going to go. The question now is who will replace him, and obviously it's far too early to say that. But I think they're going to need somebody with a stronger media presence. That's one thing for sure, and somebody who can give the message out to the world via the media about what rugby league is all about. So who that will be, I've not got the slightest idea at the moment, Jake. But if you've got any suggestions, write them down on a postcard and send them to RFL HQ.
I was going to say, mate, like that was going to be my next question. Is there any candidates for you where you thought in the past years they'd make a really good RFL chief exec?
Well, none that are obvious candidates. Um, so no, I don't know. I mean, what you'll probably find is that if they advertise the role, somebody will come out of the woodwork unexpectedly, and we don't know who that is likely to be. But as I say, I think whoever the person is, he or she will need strong leadership skills and strong communication skills as well, PR skills and so on, because we need to get Rugby League's PR probably a bit more sharply defined than it has been. And whoever that person is who's going to take that job, it's going to be an incredibly important appointment because, of course, that person will be overseeing, the Super League expanding hopefully to 14 teams next year, and he'll be overseeing, or she'll be overseeing, the merger of the Championship and League One into one competition, and of course, it's the World Cup next year in Australia that we'll be sending an England team to. So there's a lot to think about, and we've just got to wait and see now who that person might be.
Would you like to see perhaps a former player put their hand up and maybe try a new venture? Because we always talk about how important it is to have someone that understands the sport, like a rugby league personality in that role.
Yeah, well, one obvious candidate, one potential candidate, and I've not got the slightest idea whether he would be interested or not, but he's already now a member of the board of directors, and that is Abi Akoku, who, of course, was a very notable player in his day, and subsequent to that became the chief executive of Bradford Bulls, and did that job for a while. Now I think lives in London, if I understand it correctly. He's a very, very eloquent guy. Somebody who is confident in front of the cameras and presents a very good image in front of the cameras. So that's one potential possibility. Now, I've obviously not asked Abby whether he's interested in the job, so I'm just purely speculating here. But he's a very, very. I mean, he would certainly bring some strong qualities to the job if he were interested. So let's just wait and see. I mean, I don't know what other what other economic roles he has at the moment. He might be doing very well elsewhere. I've lost touch with him really since he left Bradford Bulls, but certainly he's a very intelligent and quite an aspirational guy. So I think he'd be one candidate, but hopefully one of many.
And say, you haven't been tempted to throw your hand up for the role, Martyn?
Far
You've
too
got the
old,
knowledge
mate,
and experience. I doubt that,
Unfortunately,
mate.
if I were about 30 years younger, I would do, but I don't think they'd want someone, it's a very demanding. It'll be a very demanding job as well. So somebody younger, somebody with lots of energy, somebody with lots of good judgment, I think, is what they're looking for. But I'm very happy to just sit on the sidelines, and I'll offer any advice I can give to anybody who actually wants any advice, which I'm not sure they will. Who knows?
Because it sounds like, you touched on it, but it's probably it's an exciting time for the game, but it could also be a very challenging time. There's a lot of unknown
Very
going
much
into
so.
the future. So you probably want someone, who's young, fresh, because I guarantee you, whoever takes the position, they're going to get a few more extra grey hairs in their head
Oh
as the
gosh,
years
yes.
go on.
Well, I've got
Um,
enough already. Yeah.
but no, that's all right, mate. Well, any idea on when, like, you think they'll come to a decision on who that next chief exec will be?
Well, they've now got to put together, um, a, a strategy, a recruitment strategy for that role, and I dare say they will be involving some advisors who are external to the RFL to put together put together a job description, to put together the job requirements, and to perhaps headhunt somebody who might be suitable for the role. So I don't think we'll see any evidence of that for probably 3 to 4 weeks at the very earliest, and maybe even longer than that, I imagine that they would be looking for somebody to start in the role at the start of the new year. So, as I say, it's going to be fascinating to find out who that will involve, and of course, by then we will know whether there are going to be 14 clubs in Super League or not, won't we? So it's going to be fascinating, really.
Yeah, no, definitely, mate. We'll move on to the next talking point, mate. Darren Lockyer has been making news headlines over that way. Seems like he's had a bit of a business trip, you might say, to London to check out the Broncos. What's he doing over there at the moment, mate? And can we expect him to be, taking a stake in the London Broncos next year?
Oh, yeah, well, I think he definitely is. And I actually met him on Sunday at Headingley, and he was with his business partner, Grant Wetchell, and also Paul White, the ex Brisbane Broncos chief executive, was at Headingley as well. And Darren made it absolutely clear that he's very committed to this London Broncos project. I don't think there's the slightest doubt that he's taking that he and Grant are going to take a major stake in London Broncos. They've got some interesting potential plans for the club, and of course they're very keen to get the club into Super League next year via this application process that's going to go in front of the panel chaired by Lord Kane. So it's going to be fascinating to see whether they succeed in getting into Super League next year. What I'm not aware of yet is how much capital they've committed to London Broncos. Obviously, they're going to have to commit a very significant amount, because if London Broncos are going to work, it won't work on a shoestring. But having said that, it's not just a question of money, because David Hughes used to invest about £2 million every year into London Broncos, but it never made them more sustainable, I'm afraid. He kept having to do it year after year. And that, of course, has to not be the aim of Darren and Grant. They've got to find a way of making the club work, making their attendances grow. They both attended, by the way, the game London versus Bradford at the weekend, which is a very exciting game. Probably had a couple of thousand people there at the Cherry Red Record Stadium in Wimbledon. They both enjoyed the game very much. It was a terrific match, actually, and London looked as though they were going to win for a significant part of it, but got pipped in the end by the Bulls. I think they've got to really think very strategically about London Broncos. I mean, first things first, I think the fact that Darren and Grant are involved means that London Broncos will still be called London Broncos next year. Given their links with Brisbane Broncos, I can't imagine them wanting to move away from the current identity of the club, which I think is a very good thing if that's the case. I'm only guessing there, but I think I'm likely to be correct. They've then talked about getting Jason Demetriou on board as their head coach, and Jason again is another guy who I've known quite well in the past, who I admire a great deal, and who knows an awful lot about the English game, Super League, and so on. He spent a lot of time playing here, and he has coached here. He was a very successful coach at Keighley, oddly enough, which many people might have now forgotten. But I think he would be a terrific head coach. And of course, some people have made the point, well, what happens to Mike Eccles? Well, Mike, if there's one thing that's really important, it's that Mike Eccles has got to have a long-term future with London Broncos. But I think it's going to be, as a director of rugby role, there's going to be a lot that needs doing in terms of creating pathways for players. And London Broncos need to have an academy team that's playing in the academy competition to bring young London players through the ranks. And I think Mike Eccles is perfectly positioned to be able to put that together and to link and to be an assistant coach maybe with Jason, assuming that Jason does come over here. And I think that will be a terrifically strong combination. And of course, the other thing is that Gary Hetherington, who's the man who's set all this up, Gary's a genius for knowing how to get clubs working properly, how to create the right structure in order to ensure long-term growth for a club. So he needs to stay on board. I don't quite know what the deal is. Whether Gary is selling the whole of his stake in London Broncos to Darren and Grant, or whether he's selling half of it, or three-quarters of it, whatever. But the key thing is that he's got to stay on board, and I obviously anticipate that he will do, and that's going to be very, very important for Darren and Grant, because they're going to obviously be in Queensland presumably, and but they need a very strong presence actually in London if the club's going to be successful.
And that was one of the things I've been reading about. Some of the comments they made. They sort of said they can't treat the team, or the team can't be run like every other Northern club. They have to take a different approach. They have to, I guess, bring out that London identity. And I think listening to them talk the other day, they made the point that if they are to secure Demetriou, they have a target for a potential captain to come over and play for the Broncos. They spoke about that ability of being able to attract NRL players over with the prospect of playing and living in London. I mean, over the past, if that was the case, don't you think we would have seen that with players in the past? Or do you think Darren Lockyer's involvement alone will maybe help attract some of those players?
Well, I think Darren's involvement will help attract players, but I'll tell you who I would, if I'm going to give them some advice, I'll tell you who I think the captain ought to be. If we're talking about a highly experienced NRL player whose name would carry some resonance in London, even with London Broncos' relatively small profile in London, the guy who I would definitely go for is Daly Cherry-Evans, because he's obviously, his contract has expired at Manly now. He's been linked strongly with Sydney Roosters, but Daly Cherry-Evans is an incredibly articulate guy. If you watch Daly dealing with the media, I think he's an absolute expert at it. I think he'd be a big name for a lot of Australians who are based in London, and I think he'd be an inspirational club captain, even if it was just for 1 year. And I mean, anybody who's watched him this year knows perfectly well that he's got one more year as a player still within him. And if I were advising Darren and Grant and Gary about who the captain should be next year, who's the first guy they ought to go for, it would definitely be Daly. Whether he would be interested or not is obviously something that I can't answer, but he's the guy I'd go for. And the other point we need to make, you made the point really well just then, that the London team needs to be reflective of London as a city. And of course, nowadays, London is a multi-ethnic city. It's not, not just a white European city. It's full of people from all parts of the world. And I think the team ideally ought to reflect that. And we ought to be getting as many people from, multi-ethnic backgrounds as they can. I mean, a perfect example of that is one of the London players, Sadiq Adebayi, who's a guy who was originally born in Nigeria, but grew up in London, a quite dedicated Muslim guy. And that's the sort of, he sort of adds a dimension to the London team that you might not see elsewhere. And, there are so many potential great athletes in London who have got a West Indian heritage, for example, who the club needs to be going for. A junior club such as the Brixton Bulls, for example, they've got They're based in Brixton, which is a very multi-ethnic part of the city. And I'd love to see some kids coming through that club and others like it, who will ultimately graduate to become first teamers at the Broncos, and that would be a really exciting prospect, Jake.
Yeah, you make some good points there, mate. I didn't really think about Daly Cherry Evans, but at the moment it probably makes sense because the trail seems to have gone cold on his signing with the Roosters. There was all that talk early in the year that it was signed, sealed, and delivered. The rumours was that they were going to hold off until the end of the season to announce that signing, and it could still be the case because the Roosters obviously have made the playoffs, but it seems to have gone very quiet around that signing, and I wouldn't be surprised maybe if Darren Lockyer has gotten in his ear saying, "Hey, there could be an opportunity over at the Broncos
Well, you
next
never
season."
know. I mean, I don't know what the relationship is between Darren and Daly, but I would imagine it would be a relationship of great respect in both directions. Both great players, both Australian Test stars, both Queensland stars, and Daly. I mean, obviously, I think Daly Cherry Evans has a long-term future in rugby league administration. And that is the sort of guy. I mean, he's been the chairman of the Rugby League Players Association in Australia, and he's the sort of guy who I could imagine in a few years' time becoming the chief executive of the NRL, for example. And he might. I could imagine him coming over here, playing for a year for London Broncos, and then perhaps even being the chief executive or managing director of the club once he retires from playing. If that appealed to him, and I don't know Daly, so whether that would appeal to him, I obviously don't know. But he must be thinking now, one would imagine, about his future career, and I would certainly hope that career would entail him still being involved in rugby league in hopefully for the rest of his life, because I think he's a
Mm,
tremendous asset to the game.
yeah, definitely, mate. The other thing is, I was thinking like Cherry Evans, yeah, it'd be great next year, but it might only be a one season stint for him. I think the other name, and this is maybe a fantasy, but Nathan Cleary. Let's say he goes on to win his fifth premiership with the Penrith Panthers this year. Will that satisfy his hunger to go down as one of the great halfbacks in the NRL? And then I guess Mary Fowler, his partner, plays in the Women's Premier League over there. Would that be enough to convince him to come over to London, do you think?
Well, you never know, and I mean, I suspect he's got quite. I don't know what his contractual situation is at Penrith, but I can only imagine it's quite a long one. So if they were to try and get Nathan, I would think they'd have to buy his contract out, which would be quite an expensive operation. And of course, Penrith would would imagine would resist that very strongly. So it could be a fantasy, Jake, but you never know. If in a few months' time we hear that Nathan Cleary has joined London Broncos, we'll be able to say you heard it here first.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, mate.
Jake Kearnan was the man who predicted it. That would be terrific, wouldn't it?
Well, mate, absolutely. I
But
was
I'm
just
not sure
looking
it's going
though.
to happen.
Sorry, mate, you're not sure what's going to happen. I was just looking. It looks like he's contracted through until the end of 2027, so maybe not next year, but hey, he might have clauses in his contract to get out. Who knows? But
Well, the thing that Darren said, by the way, that was quite interesting was that they've got somebody in mind, but they think he would only want to come for obvious reasons if the club were in Super League next year, not if they were still in the Championship. And my guess is that the news that we've heard over the last few days almost ensures that they will be in Super League next year, because I don't think I think they'll be able to present a strong enough case to actually persuade the panel chaired by Lord Kane, and I think the really important thing and the reason why they will get into Super League is because I think a London side in Super League will add something to the value of the next TV contract, and that's going to be the real crucial thing. I don't know what the next TV contract is likely to yield for Super League, but it's got to start rising. It's 21.5 million at the moment. It's got to go up to a significantly greater amount than that, and it's got to get other broadcasters interested apart from Sky. And I think if London Broncos were in Super League, I think companies like DAZN and so on, other streaming companies, would be a lot more interested than if they weren't there. So that's why I think London will be in Super League in 2026.
Well, mate, it's an exciting time for London Broncos fans, that's for sure. I'm excited for them, just to have, because in my eyes, Darren Lockyer can do no wrong. He was my idol growing up, as a
Yeah.
Broncos fan, and in my eyes, like I never really got to watch the great Wally Lewis play, but I got to watch Darren Lockyer play, and he's the greatest of all time in my opinion, from what I
I'll
saw.
tell you a story. I'll tell you a story about Darren Lockyer in relation to myself, and that is in 2004. In those days, our company, League Publications Limited, we were in control of the International Golden Boot. We awarded the Golden Boot every year to the to the winner, whoever it was. Back in 2004, there was a Tri Nations tournament in that was being held in this country, and the final was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon at Headingley. No, sorry, at Elland Road in Leeds. And on the Wednesday, I think it was on the Tuesday night before the final, we actually held a major function in Leeds to award the Golden Boot, and we awarded it before the final of the Tri Nations tournament. And the two obvious candidates to win the Golden Boot were Darren Lockyer and Andy Farrell. And the judging panel, in their wisdom, gave the Golden Boot to Andy Farrell, who, great player, no complaints. But I always remember sitting on the stage as the chairman of our company, and I looked at Darren Lockyer when Andy was being awarded the Golden Boot, and I thought to myself, crikey, I'm not sure this is a good sign for Saturday's game at Elland Road. I had a horrible feeling that Darren, not being awarded the Golden Boot, he was going to actually have a blinder on Saturday and show us why he should have been awarded it. And he did. And the funny thing was that on that day, my daughter was receiving her degree from Oxford University. So on the morning of that Saturday, we had to be down in Oxford, and we had lunch at with the university. And I'd calculated that by the time the lunch was over, if I drove very quickly back up the M1 to Leeds, I could get there for the second half of the final. And that's what I intended to do. I intended to drop my wife and daughter at home, which was on the route to Elland Road, and then get there for the second half. But the trouble was that by the time we got to my house, it was half time, and the score was about 40 points to nil or something. Darren Lockyer had been absolutely incredible in that game, one of his greatest ever games. And I was so deflated that I just went home and watched the second half of the game on TV. And fortunately, they didn't score as many points in the second half. But it was one of those terrible moments where you start the day full of optimism. It was fantastic. My daughter graduating from Oxford and so on, and then you anticipate a fantastic game in the final of the Tri Nations, and Darren Lockyer absolutely ruined it. He really ruined it, ruined the day, and it did what great players do, which is just, he just took control of the game and was absolutely fantastic. And certainly, and interestingly, at Headingley, Gary Hetherington made the point that they've got they've got a list of the 30 greatest players in rugby league history who have all played at Headingley, and they've got a beautiful presentation on one of the walls inside the main stand at Headingley. But there are two players who would be in that list who have never played at Headingley. And one of them is Darren Lockyer. The other one is Andrew Johns. And so they're the two players missing because they've never played there. And, I think Darren has a slight regret about that, if I'm really honest about it, or at least appeared to have. And but he does love. I mean, Darren is an Anglophile. There's no question about it. He does love England, and he does love rugby league in England. He loves the English crowds, and I think he's going to put a hell of a big effort into making the Broncos successful, which is a terrific thing, I think. And given his past record of success in whatever he does, because he's now a very successful entrepreneur, along with Grant, I wouldn't bet against him, put it that way. And I
Yeah,
think
absolutely.
in the long term, Jake, and this is the very long term, not next year, the year after, or even maybe 5 or 10 years' time, but in the very long term, London Broncos could be potentially the biggest rugby league club in the world, in the world's premier international city. That's got to be the very long term objectives. That even if it's achieved long after I'm gone, who knows? But that's hopefully what they're aiming for.
Yeah, that's right, mate. Such a big market, and I've lost count of the amount of times Darren Lockyer won the Broncos or Queensland or Australia a game of football. He just had that clutch gene where when it all mattered, he was the one that stood up and came up with the big plays. Hopefully, he can come up with a big play for London. But yeah, mate, a lot to look forward to for London fans. I'm excited for him. Who knows? I might even have to buy myself a London jersey with Lockyer's involvement.
Well, and come over. Yes, come over. Actually, I'll tell you what, maybe communication director for the club. Do you fancy that role? That'd be a
Mate,
great role for you.
if it got me in the room with Darren, just for a bit of a
Mm,
one-on-one, even if it was just for an interview, I'd
yeah,
jump at the opportunity, mate.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, mate. Well, all things looking positive for London. Let's go towards Salford, mate. I had a thought today. What happens with Paul Rowley after this is all over? Is he? Because I know he was going to go into that. Was it the director role after this
Well, he
year?
was going to go into the director role, but that's now looking, uncertain, as is everything at Salford. They survived. They did have the High Court hearing last Wednesday, and it was adjourned again, which will allow them to complete the season, which is what their aim was. And thank goodness they will be able to do that. So they've got 2 games left. They will be there right to the end of the season. And the question is, what happens to them after that? I think they'll probably go into administration. And I just think that somebody somewhere will probably take them out of administration and set them up again as a championship club next year. I think, the best potential scenario. And whether Paul Rowley um, would still be the coach, who knows? But hopefully he will, because I think what we really want for Salford is to have a rebirth of the club. It's financially more stable, and where it's you know able to be competitive again. And I don't think that would be in the Super League next year. So I think they've got to drop a division. They've got some incredibly faithful supporters. I mean, they won at Warrington a week ago, and much of the end of the terracing at the end of the pitch was absolutely crammed with Salford fans. They've been amazing. They are fantastic supporters of Salford, far too valuable to allow to the club to go under completely into liquidation. So we'll see what happens, but we need somebody to step in, hopefully, as I say, to take them out of administration if that's indeed what happens.
Yeah, I was just sort of thinking like, hey, maybe he's a potential target for London it doesn't have to be in a coaching position, but I just think he would be such a valuable asset for any club in the
Oh
competition
yes,
in any
potentially,
role
yeah,
he
yeah.
wants.
But it's a shame that Kurt Haggerty has left Salford as because he was going to be the coach next year, and you never know. I mean, he may return. If they can reconstitute the club next year, he may come back. Who knows? It's all very much up in the air at the moment, and nobody's quite sure what's likely to happen.
Oh, time will tell, mate. Time will tell.
It will.
Um,
It will.
Moving on to the next talking point, mate. What have we got here? Lewis Dodd. Looks like there's some whispers he might be returning to Super League with Catalans. What are your thoughts on this?
Well,
He'd be partnering Toby Sexton if he does return.
well, I think he'd be very successful there if he does. But I mean, he's got I think he's earning about $700,000 a year on his contract at South Sydney, which is I think is a 3-year contract if I remember rightly. Um, I don't think the Catalans would want to pay him that much to take him from South Sydney. So I think wherever he goes, his salary will be augmented by South Sydney, so that they will be paying for that at least part of his contract throughout his contractual period. Um, Whether he wants to come back to Super League or not, I'm not sure. I suppose he may well do, but I think I think he's a very determined young man, and I don't think he would want to give up on playing in the NRL simply because it hasn't worked out at South Sydney. I thought the last game he played for South Sydney didn't do at all badly. I thought his kicking game was excellent, and I don't think he made many mistakes. He actually saved against Brisbane. He actually saved a try on the try line and so on. So, but I've obviously not watched every game, and he's played a lot in the reserve grade and so on. So, it's hard to say precisely why he's not had more opportunities there. Clearly, just doesn't seem to have impressed Wayne Bennett, and when you don't impress Wayne, you don't get picked in his sides, and that's just a fact of life. So I don't know what will happen, but I'd be very happy to see him at Catalans, and I think a halfback combination between him and Sexton would be a really interesting one. And the key thing is it would be a pretty young combination. I think Sexton leaving. I mean, I think the Bulldogs made a mistake by letting Sexton go and sign in Lachlan Galvin. I don't think they've looked as good since Galvin joined them. Not that that's Galvin's fault, but I just think it disrupted their established patterns of play. And whether they'll make a big impact in the playoffs is a interesting question. But I think Sexton and Dodd would be a terrific halfback combination for the Catalans, and I think Dodd would be extremely highly motivated if he were to join the Catalans, and I think he'd give them a bit of the sort of momentum that they need to get back into the top six.
That's right, mate. And I think, as you touched on there, they've both got a point to prove. And yeah, the Galvin one's interesting, isn't it? Like the Bulldogs pretty much had a great combination of where Sexton would steer the ship, and then Burton would, come up with the big plays, get the back set, set up their attacking shape. And then they've brought in Lachlan Galvin, who pretty much plays the same style of football that Matt Burton does, and they've sort of lost their captain of the ship, it feels like. And
Yes,
yeah, I feel like since he's come into the, I mean, it's obvious since he's come into the team, they haven't been as dominant as what they are, and now they're going into week one of the playoffs, and they got, belted on, not belted, but the Sharks put a big scoreline on them. What's it?
yes, they did, didn't they?
Um, yeah, and I don't know. I just feel like they've lost their mojo a little bit, and Galvin's not playing as good as he was at the Tigers, I feel like. Maybe
I
the
think it
pressure's
was a
starting to get to
mistake for
him.
him to leave the Tigers, if I'm really honest about it. I think it was a mistake to leave the Tigers. He was coming through the ranks there. He was absolutely outstanding. He was guiding them to some great wins earlier in the season. He was partnering Jerome Luai, which was a great partnership, I thought. And for some reason, he decided that Benji Marshall wasn't the coach for him, which, of course, is perfectly entitled to think. But I think it became public that feeling, and that was very unwise. That sort of thing should be kept in house between coach and player. And obviously, the Bulldogs swoop for him, and in the long term, it might work out great. You know, he's a very young player. He's immensely talented. It's always difficult, particularly transferring halfway through a season. If you're a playmaker in a one of the spine roles, it's very difficult to fit into a team that's already got an established way of playing. So, just because he's found it, you know, difficult to fit in doesn't mean he's a bad player. He's actually a great young player and a potential Australian test star. But it's just difficult to do what he's done this year. And I think, given the close season, we'll see a much more coherent Bulldogs team next year with him at the helm.
Yeah, exactly right, mate. It does take time for those partnerships to sort of get set, and especially for him being so young too, coming into that side. Like,
Mm.
really, I think they need either one of them to just put their hand up and say, "I'm driving this ship, I'm steering this ship." And as a young player coming into a team full of, I guess, adult men, it can be daunting to put your hand up as a young fella saying, "This is
It's
my
a big
team."
weight on young shoulders. I mean, he's a confident young guy, so maybe he doesn't feel it much, but it is a big weight on young shoulders. And
Mm.
as I say, I'm not sure if he was going to move to the Bulldogs. I think it would have been better waiting until the end of the season and moving then rather than halfway through it. But that's happened, and we'll see how it works out this weekend, won't we? Because I think the Bulldogs are playing. Who are they playing? They're playing Melbourne,
Storm. Yeah.
which, although Melbourne are going to be missing some real key players for that game, so we'll probably talk about the playoffs in a few minutes. But it's going to be a fascinating opening weekend, Jake.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. Well, not much else to talk about news-wise that I have here, mate. The other talking point, interesting, I saw the Dolphins put out the news that Hamiso Tabuai-Fidow is going to miss internationals at the end of the season. He's had a MCL injury to his knee in the final match over the weekend. They, in their post, they said he was going to miss the Pacific
Pacific
Championship.
Cup. Yes, that was interesting, wasn't it?
So I'm
Mm.
like, does that mean he's going to play for Samoa now, and he's switched his allegiances,
Looks it.
perhaps?
It looks it, doesn't it? Yeah, yeah. It
Hey, we
looks.
need him for Australia.
Oh, well, you're not going to get him, and that means that probably means Tom Trbojevic is going to be playing in the centre for Australia at Wembley this year, I would imagine, and maybe alongside Latrell Mitchell if Latrell is fit, and that's not a bad combination to be honest. So I
Yeah,
wouldn't worry
I'd
too much.
even I'd go as far as saying on form at the moment, I'd like to see Katoni Staggs potentially getting a shot at one of those centre
Oh,
positions. He's been playing really
potentially
good for the
yes,
Broncos.
and Tedesco
Um,
perhaps still at full back. I mean, he can still do it, can't he?
oh, absolutely, mate. All right, before we get into this weekend's matchups, we had some pretty interesting matchups take place in the Super League last weekend. The obvious one, Wigan defeating Saints, 18 points to 4. Just watching the highlights through YouTube, mate, it seemed like it was a great atmosphere at the game. I was jealous I couldn't be there in person. But it looks like the Saints put up, quite a strong fight.
Yeah, and they were. They came out of the blocks absolutely brilliantly. They looked for the first 27 minutes. They looked as though they were going to really put one over Wigan. They were determined to, that St Helens are in an interesting position because it was a 4 point game for them. If they won, they were probably going to be in the top four. If they lost, they might have ended up being in might end up being in fifth position, which may well still happen. And they obviously had Morgan Knowles missing, and Jack Welsby played at loose forward to replace Morgan, while they retained Tristan Saylor at full back. And it was working brilliantly. Jack Welsby created a fantastic try with a brilliant pass to his winger, and Dion Cross that was. And you thought, oh, Saints are really up for this. But then, I mean, I don't know whether you've read my column, but there was a really, well, two important things happened in the game in the first half. One was on around 20 minutes when Junior Nsemba replaced Liam Byrne on the pitch. It came off the bench, Junior. And then on 27 minutes or thereabouts, Darryl Clark conceded a penalty in the tackle on Harry Smith. And Wigan got the penalty, and shortly afterwards, Liam Farrell charged down the field, made a terrific break, and shortly after that, it was Junior Nsemba who got out a perfect pass for the opening try by Wigan, and shortly after that he did it again. Nsemba was terrific. For the second try in particular, he actually took a very high bomb from Harry Smith. He was in the midst of a posse of St Helens defenders, but he sort of jumped up with his arms high in the air. He actually took the ball, but immediately gave it to Liam Marshall. And that was just an incredible try. And he'd given one to Jake Wardle just about 3 or 4 minutes earlier. And suddenly, from being 4-0 down, Wigan were 10-4 up. And it was, Junior Nsemba, if he'd not come onto the pitch, and if Darryl Clark had not given that penalty away, St Helens might still have been ahead at that point. In fact, they might even have gone further ahead. But once Wigan took the lead, St Helens seemed to lose the confidence that they'd played with earlier in the game. And Wigan moved ahead 18-4 early in the second half. They got a third try very early in the second half when Jay Field ran the length of the field after a Mark Percival grubber was picked up by Bevan French and given to Field. And that was the game won, really. And although Wigan didn't score again, St Helens tried very hard, but didn't look as though they were going to score another try, really. And it was just obviously a disappointing night for St Helens and their supporters, but a great night for Wigan and their fans.
Yeah, that's it, mate. And I think that long field try that Field scored kind of blew out the score, but it made the scoreline and the margin wider than what the game probably reflected.
How many long distance tries has Jay Field scored? I mean, he just once he gets into open territory, there's no stopping him, is there?
I reckon half of his career highlights package would just be long field tries. I don't know. He's always there as a support player, and he just pops up at the right time, doesn't he?
He does, yeah. But let's not underestimate his defensive skills as well. That brilliant tackle in the World Club Challenge against Taylor May was incredible, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, mate. And one that will, feature on his career highlight reel.
No doubt about
for years to come, mate.
Yeah.
The other interesting matchup, mate, Cass defeating Wakefield, 26 points to 22. Bit of a surprise, this one.
Well, I was talking to one of our recent recent guests, Matthew Ellis, the owner of Wakefield, on Sunday, and he said that when they got to Castleford, sometimes you can just sense something in the air. And he could sense how much that game meant to Castleford. They'd been absolutely carpeted by their interim coach, Chris Chester, for a disastrous loss the previous week. And I think the players still had that ringing in their ears, and they were determined to not let their fans down on this occasion. And they didn't. It was a terrific match. It could have gone either way, really, but Castleford just edged it, and I think that puts them third from bottom of the league now. They've moved ahead of Huddersfield with that victory, which I think will please them a great deal, particularly if they can hold on to that position to the end of the season. And they are signing players right, left, and centre for next year with the intention of having a much better season in 2026, assuming they're still in Super League, of course.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. I'm sure Wakefield will be, hungry to get another win this weekend. Who have they got? They've got, doesn't get easier for them. They've got
Well,
Hull KR.
Wakefield is still in sixth place, 1 point ahead of Hull. But this weekend they play Hull KR at home, while Hull play Warrington at home. So on current form, you would imagine that Hull KR would win at Wakefield and Hull would beat Warrington. So it would then potentially go down to the final week of the season, wouldn't it, to see which of those two clubs gets into the top six. But Wakefield might not feel that confident against Hull KR, but who knows? There's an interesting issue around this as well, because Hull KR have got a mounting problem, and that is Jez Litton is an absolute brilliant player for them this year. He was the star again in the Hull derby, in the Hull KR beating Hull at home on Sunday. But the problem that Hull KR have got is that he's now accumulated 5.5 disciplinary points as Jez, and if he commits one more faulty tackle, he, even if it's a very minor one, even just getting 1 point for a grade A incident under our system over here, he would then be suspended. And there's a real potential danger with Jez that he could be suspended for the big games towards the end of the season if he picks up another point. And that will play heavy for Hull KR, because I don't know quite how they're going to ensure that that Jez does avoid another penalty point, because what we're finding in the game now is that if a player ducks into a tackle, if a player carrying a ball ducks into a tackle, and the tackler just happens to hit his forehead with his arm or hand, that automatically becomes a 1 point A grade disciplinary offence. So I think Jez is going to. I just don't know how they're going to handle this, because he's going to have to be so careful not to incur any more penalties. Does it mean that they're going to? I mean, the alternative that Willie Peters might opt for is to keep him out of the side, until the playoffs. He might not want to risk him against Wakefield. I mean, because they're almost certain now they're still 4 points ahead of Wigan, 2 points, two games to go, much better points difference than Wigan, so they're almost bound to win the league leaders league leaders shield. Particularly if they get a result against Wakefield on at the weekend, so they may not, strictly speaking, need Jez in the side. So will he leave him out? It's an interesting point, isn't it?
Yeah, mate. And I reckon it's cruel in the finals when players get pulled up for something and then end up
It will be
getting
ridiculous
suspension.
if Jez Litton doesn't play assuming that Hull KR play in the grand final. It will be ridiculous if Jez Litton isn't part of their side.
I always
That's
think
the
back
point.
to I always think back to like 2014 when Isaac Luke had to sit out of the Rabbitohs' historic grand final win because I think he got suspended the week prior. Think back to Cameron Smith back in 2008. He missed the final for a grapple tackle. I think they called it on Sam Thaiday, and then Storm got belted 40 points to nil by Manly Sea Eagles. But I just think that, once you get to finals time, I think if you do something that's harsh enough for a suspension, it should just wait until the following year so that when the two teams meet
I
in the
think
grand
so.
final.
And the thing is, I actually had a discussion with Willie Peters on a recent press conference about this. And I suggested that some of these points, when you get 1 point for a minor offence, there should be a time limit attached to it. It shouldn't last the whole season. It should be 6 weeks or maybe 10 weeks, whatever, however many weeks. There should be a time limit where it expires and that you go back down to zero, in effect. And obviously, Willie agreed with that. The only argument is how long should the time limit be? But to carry points from very much earlier in the season into the playoffs, and then to be suspended from key playoff matches for something you did back in March, for example, is just crackers, in my view. We bring in these new rules and processes and don't think them through. That's the trouble in our sport very often.
No, I'm with you, mate, 100%. All right, mate. What do you want to? How about we get into this weekend's matchups? I might just get your quick picks, and then we'll look at the week one of the NRL playoffs. With Thursday night, we've got Leeds taking on Catalans. Who do you like in this one, Mark?
Well, you've got to go for Leeds. Leeds are still in with a chance of finishing in second place, but highly unlikely now. But Wigan would have to lose this week, and that's incredibly unlikely. But no, I think Leeds are destined for third place in the table, perhaps, and I think they'll beat the Catalans this week quite convincingly.
Yep. Friday, we've got Wigan taking on Cass.
Well, you can only see one result here, and it's Wigan to beat Castleford and to consolidate second place. And I think that if they do beat Castleford, I think they'll be assured of second place. Even though they play Leeds in the final week of the season, Leeds would have to win by a cricket score to edge them out of second place, and that's obviously unlikely.
And we've also got Lee taking on Saints, which should be a tough matchup.
Absolute cracker. Yeah, I think Saints now probably can't get into the top four. They're probably destined to finish in fifth place. Lee can still finish third. And I think if Leeds were to slip up, so Lee I think will be very highly motivated for this game, and I think they'll win by about 10 points or so.
Yeah, and on Saturday we've got Hull FC taking on Warrington.
Well, you've got to go for Hull, haven't you? And they've played quite well against Hull KR. They've got some very good young players coming through. I was very impressed by this young man, Lloyd Kemp. He's a name to watch out for, playing at fullback for Hull. By the way, the sad thing for Hull is that Jordan Rapiner, it looks as though his career with Hull is now over because he's been suspended for 2 matches after incidents in the Hull derby, and they've only got 2 matches left in the regular season. So unless Hull do make the playoffs, it looks as though Jordan's career is over, which will be sad, really, because he's been a terrific player mainly for Canberra, of course, but I think he's made a terrific contribution to Hull this year. So it'd be sad to see him go.
Yeah, no one wants to end on a suspension, do they?
No.
That's disappointing, mate. Sunday's matchups, we've got Wakefield taking on Hull KR. We just touched on this one, but that could be a cracker as well.
Oh, gosh, yes. And you'd imagine that Hull KR would win that game because they probably will still want to win at least one game to make sure they win the Shield. So you would think that they'd be too strong for Wakefield, but you never know. Wakefield have got the potential to beat them And as somebody said to me on Sunday, Hull KR still look like a team that could have another loss in them. So, but I don't think I think they'll win, but only by a small margin, 2 points, something like that.
Yep. And the final matchup at the round, mate, we've got Huddersfield taking on Salford.
Well, the two bottom teams, and I think Huddersfield should win. Obviously, we never know what sort of team Salford are going to put out, but I think it should be Huddersfield's this game, and reasonably comfortably by about 12 points.
Yeah, perfect, mate. And we'll get into the week one of the NRL playoffs, mate. Friday night, well, Friday night for me, it'll be Friday morning for you guys. I got Melbourne Storm taking on Canterbury Bulldogs.
Well, this should be terrific, shouldn't it? Melbourne are going to be missing Jerome Hughes, though, aren't they? And I think that could be, make things very difficult for them. The Bulldogs, though, have been misfiring quite a bit recently, as we were saying earlier. Um, and in front of their own crowd, there should be hopefully a sellout crowd there because there are no AFL games in Melbourne at the weekend, are there? All the AFL finals games are in Brisbane and Perth.
Mm.
So there should be a lot of AFL fans looking for a game to watch at the weekend in Melbourne, and hopefully they'll fill Amy Park. Um, I'd like to see Melbourne win because I always like to see Melbourne do well. But I'm a bit of a fan of Canterbury as well, so I'm sort of a bit of a neutral, I suppose, in this regard. But I think Melbourne should just about sneak it. What do you think?
Yeah, I would say so, mate. The only other out that they have, which was kind of late news, but Ryan Pappenhausen's also out this weekend, which is a
Right.
huge loss for Storm. In saying that, they've got Nick Meaney playing at fullback, who's just as reliable at the back.
Mm,
But Harry Grant returns for Storm, and he was a massive loss for them. We could see that in the way they played against the Broncos last week.
mm.
But yeah, mate, I think I I'd be back in Storm at the moment just with their finals experience. You'd have to imagine Craig Bellamy will have them up for it after two straight losses.
You would think so,
Um,
wouldn't you?
yeah, but look, it'll be a great way to start off the final series. I'm
Mm.
looking forward to it. On Saturday, mate, we have the first match up, the Warriors taking on the Panthers.
Oh gosh, yeah, I think that I'd go for the Panthers there, and I suspect you might as well, because the Panthers have got all this experience of playing finals football. They're finished in seventh place. Wouldn't it be remarkable for a team to win the grand final having finished seventh? And that's certainly possible with Nathan Cleary on his best form, and it'll be a terrific crowd again in New Zealand. I think they're up against the All Blacks. The All Blacks are playing South Africa at the same time. And there's quite a bit of speculation in New Zealand about which game will draw the biggest TV audience, with quite a few people saying the Warriors might even outdraw the All Blacks. And it would be great to see the Warriors win. I've got a real admiration for the Warriors. I'd love to see them win the grand final, if I'm honest about it. If I could pick any team to win the grand final, it would be them. But I struggle to see them beating Penrith. That's the trouble. They've actually drawn the short straw. I think everybody probably wanted to avoid Penrith in the opening weekend of the playoffs, but the Warriors are the ones who have landed on that particular one, and I think Penrith will knock them out. To be honest.
Yeah, and Penrith were dominant last week, and it'll be a week-long party in Auckland if the Warriors were to get through to the grand final and win it, mate. But yeah, looking at this Penrith lineup, they must be one of the most dangerous seventh place sides going into a finals campaign.
Mm,
I know I'm
no
nervous about the
doubt.
prospect of the Broncos having to face them if they do meet. The other matchup on the Saturday, mate, we have the Sharks taking on the Roosters.
Well, the Roosters are the other team that they finished eighth, but actually they look a much better team than an eighth place team, don't they? They've been in some great form. They're playing at Shark Stadium. A lot of people are very critical of having finals games at Shark Stadium because it only holds 12 or 13,000. But obviously they've finished fifth and they've got a right to play the game there. Um, but I think the Roosters might just pip them. I think we could see a situation here where the Panthers and the Roosters in seventh and eighth both progress to the next round, and that would be quite incredible, wouldn't it? Now, I think I've got a lot of admiration for Cronulla, but I just think the Roosters, with their big match experience, and of course they've got Marky Mark, haven't they, playing on the
Yeah,
wing for them, who's been a sensation this year, and I think it's going to be an absolutely fascinating game. I can't wait to see it.
yeah, mate. There should be a like a law change there. I think we should all just be able to call him Marky Mark because
Yes.
Nwanganitawazi, it takes a lot of practice.
Nawanga Nitawazi. Is that how you say it?
Smashed it. Yep, nailed it.
Nawanga Yeah, well,
Mate,
we could. I mean, we might be seeing him with the Kangaroos, might we? Now, on form, you'd think we would be doing.
the way he's finished this season, mate, like I think in the last two games he scored 7 tries. It's just I don't know.
And great
He's
ones. He's scored some great ones, hasn't he? And
yeah,
he's great at collecting the ball from high kicks as well. I think he'd be a massive danger to whoever he was facing in the England team.
and yeah, there are some rumours circulating that the Wallabies are going to try and poach him back from league. So I hope we can
Well, I
keep
don't
him
think
in the
there's any
game,
doubt
mate.
about that. Yes, I mean he's got a contract that includes next season, and I can't imagine him not wanting to fulfil that contract. But he deliberately signed a 2-year contract that would give him the chance to go back to the rugby union if for the World Cup that's being held in Australia in 2027. I obviously hope he doesn't, but you could certainly understand it if he did, I suppose. But who knows? That's down the track.
Mm, that's right. On Sunday, mate, the final matchup of the weekend, we've got my Brisbane Broncos taking on the Raiders down in Canberra. Who do you have in this one, mate?
Well, interestingly, the Raiders rested virtually their entire first team when they went to the Dolphins on Sunday. And they'll all come back again, obviously, for this game. It's an interesting one, isn't it? Is that a wise move to give players a rest when you can do? Because obviously they'd already won the Giltinan Shield. Um, I don't know, and you've got to say that Brisbane have got what it takes to go down to Canberra and beat them. Whether they will, I'm not quite so sure. I think this is the most intriguing game of the weekend in terms of the difficulty of predicting the result. I think the Raiders might just have what it takes. They'll have a full house, 23,000 people there at GIO Stadium. The crowd really do get behind them, and I think they might just be able to um, just to deflect the challenge from the Broncos and just end up with a narrow win. But gosh, it's a close one, Jake. I wouldn't like to say who it's going to be.
Yeah, mate, it's going to be yeah, a very close one. I agree. I think interesting. The Broncos, they seem to be doing all right with Billy Walters and Ben Hunt in the halves. They're playing really well together, those two. And I
Oh
think Billy
yeah,
Walters has been
I think he's
one
been
of the
outstanding.
Broncos' best players this year. He's definitely
Mm,
flying under the radar. But it looks like I think next week Ezra Mam and Ben Hunter are likely to be healthy. But if
mm.
Broncos are to get that win over Raiders, if you're Madge, are you thinking to yourself, why ruin a good
You change
thing?
a winning side. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
It's
So
the old
it'd be
coach's
interesting
dilemma,
to
isn't
see.
it? That do you change a
Yeah.
winning side to bring top players back into the side?
Hmm.
Always a difficult one, and I'm glad it's not a decision I have to make.
That's it. And if they win, they get that week off going into a preliminary final.
Absolutely.
So yeah, very hard decision to make. Anyway, mate, we've been going for a while now. So much to talk about. Is there anything you want to touch
We've
on
been
before we get
talking
out of
probably
here?
for too long. Yeah, so we better bring it to an end, hadn't we? And
Better wrap it
we
up.
could talk a lot longer, but it's been great to see you again, and we'll meet again next week, mate.
Yeah,
Well, we
sounds
might
good,
have a
mate.
guest. Who knows? Who knows?
Yeah.
But if we'd had a guest today, we'd have probably been on for 2 hours, wouldn't we? So sometimes it's better not to have.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely, mate. All right. Well, enjoy your footy this weekend, mate. Hopefully, you get a chance to watch as much as you can. I know I'll be on the couch for on parts of it. I'll
Well, I
be at a
was going to
race
say
day this
you're
Saturday.
heading up to North Queensland, I believe, aren't you, this weekend to with your better half?
Yeah, yeah, that's right, mate. Heading back up there. We're going back to our hometown actually, which is Billawheeler. It's a little town, about an hour's drive, hour and a half inland from Rockhampton. So it's a little country town, mate, but it's like going to be a country race day, so she'll be able to catch up with all her friends and family, and
Yeah, marvelous.
um, we'll have ourselves a few beverages and enjoy the afternoon. Maybe put a couple of bets on the horses and see if we can't win some money. But
Hopefully there'll be a few tents there with TVs in them so you can see some of the games.
oh, mate, and if there aren't TVs there, I'll be pulling it out on my phone. But being
Mm.
a regional Queensland town, I'd imagine I'll have one somewhere. So
You would
um,
hope so.
yeah. All right, mate. Well, enjoy your weekend, and
And
we'll
you.
touch base next week. Hey, mate.
Great stuff, mate. Good to see you again. Cheers then.
You too, mate. Cheers.